and welcome to Let Them Talk. I'm Paul DiRienzo.
And I'm Miss Joan Marie Lucy.
And you got a very interesting behind-the-scenes look at what goes on in the seconds before the beginning of the program. But
we sit and chat.
Yes, we sit around and chat. I'd like to introduce you to our guest, David Henderson, who has honored us with his presence, and I have a copy of his book here.
Welcome to the show.
Welcome to the show, yeah. And here's his book, Excuse Me While I Kiss This Guy.
Jimi Hendrix, Voodoo Child.
You're right, Jimi Hendrix, Voodoo Child. I'm only kidding around.
Oh, about this guy. They used to joke about that, you know, him and Mitch.
I know. We'll talk about that later. We'll talk about that later. I'm going to show you folks a copy of the book close up.
Yeah,
you can take a look. Excuse me while I kiss the sky.
And this is a re-release,
Jimi Hendrix,
right?
Voodoo Child.
Yeah. Jimi
This was
Hendrix,
originally released in
Voodoo
the
Child.
70s.
Right, it's a
And it's been re-released in the 2000s.
Right, and it used to be called Jimi Hendrix, Voodoo Child of the Aquarian Age.
Oh.
So I have
I
put
like
the
that.
title back in there, the original title.
All right, great.
And the original format, too.
Right. I was just reading a little bit in the about the different versions of the book in the jacket, and it's a very interesting story. We'll get to that as well. David Henderson, let me ask you a little bit about yourself. You're an accomplished rock writer, right? Or music writer? Or how would you define yourself in that way, or would you define
Mainly
yourself?
a poetry writer. I've written a few other things, but mainly poetry. I've written some, you know, mainly poetry. Yeah.
Great, and I've noticed you read your poetry at the National Archives, the Library of Congress.
Yeah, that was great. Robert Hayden, the great late poet, who was the poet laureate at the time. Yeah.
Right. And how did you wind up writing for music magazines?
Well, you know, I knew this guy, Paul Williams, who was the editor at Crawdaddy, and he said, "Look, man, why don't you write something about Sly Stone, who was big at the time, who was becoming big at the time, and was playing at the Electric Circus, which is right down in St. Mark's Place." Or what?
So are we talking about the 60s?
Yeah, we're talking about the 60s.
Sure are. Nothing but
the
you
60s.
know, the good old 60s.
Right. Well, both Joni and I live in Lower East Side, so we're very familiar with the history, even though a lot of this happened before I moved down there, but it's pretty apocryphal, these stories, when you talk to folks who, you know, live in that neighborhood, which has got a real roots type of community there that's linked to all these things. Yeah.
Well, I have a friend
sure.
who took me on a rock tour of the village of all the people she knew during that era, and it was really fun.
Wow, that would be something.
It was really fun.
Did you take photographs?
No, but it was just one of those spontaneous afternoons, and we were walking around, and she goes, "Oh, you know, that's where so-and-so used to live, and we used to hang out there," and it just evolved into this whole day. So as soon as you started talking about that, that brought that memory to mind.
Oh, I see. Because, you know, Jimmy lived all over the downtown.
Yeah,
He
she
started
pointed
in
out
the,
a couple of his
Yeah.
in the
places.
Y, and then he lived all over like a lot of us did in
Yeah.
the 60s, and living here and there because the places were so cheap, and then people were living together because
Sure.
it was a commune thing and stuff. But and the musicians always seemed to have some kind of commune where they would listen to a lot of music and play a lot and just be an open house type thing.
So you knew Jimi Hendrix?
I knew him slightly. I knew him a little bit because I met him when we talked. He loved Crawdaddy magazine. He would come by the offices a lot. So I discovered when I met him that he had read the piece I wound up writing for about Sly Stone because it was Sly Stone and Jimmy headlining at the Fillmore East. And so I wrote something about Jimmy as well because he was fantastic. And I was shocked because I didn't really like his music till I saw him play.
I see.
And then I understood his music completely once I saw him play.
Right.
And
I noticed that's a reaction with a lot of people, especially like jazz musicians and others, had almost a negative response to Jimi Hendrix. At the same time, he is a genius, a musical genius. Why are some accomplished musicians so hesitant to accept Jimmy as a great accomplished musician?
Well, I don't
And not just a banger, you know, a guy who banged on some strings. You know, he did more than that.
Well, you know, there's always been an antagonism between jazz and popular music, and jazz and rock. There was always an antagonism. But Jimmy played with some of the best of the jazz guys: Dave Holland, Larry Young. They have these jam tapes, and Juma Sultan, who ran Studio We for years and who knew Jimmy before he became a star, and then became his conga drummer at Woodstock. He played in a lot of sessions, late sessions. He was a jazz musician who brought Larry Young and who's a keyboard player, and Dave Holland, together with Jimmy. And of course, Jimmy and Miles became very close.
Really?
And they would talk a lot, and they would play together, but only by themselves alone in the room. because Miles would show him things, because both of them based their music on the blues. And Jimmy, of course, said rock and roll, rock is blues, and Miles and Charlie Parker, they did all these compositions that are blues-based, that are very complex.
Right.
So Miles
Sure.
knew the music, and Jimmy didn't write or read,
Right.
but Miles was showing him stuff, and it was coming along real nice.
That's interesting.
That
Well,
is interesting.
it was.
I didn't
Yeah.
know of any association between the two of them.
Oh
It's
yeah,
fascinating.
they were really admiring each other a lot,
Right.
and hanging out.
It makes sense.
And the people, they had this crowd, this black avant-garde crowd that they all were a part of. It was quite interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
In the village mostly.
Yeah, and in the Upper West Side where Miles was, but Jimmy lived in the village on
Yeah.
12th Street.
Sure. On 12th
Yeah,
Street.
in front of the new school.
Oh, really? In front of the new
Yeah.
school on 12th Street. Very
Yeah.
interesting.
Okay, there's a site on
There you
it.
go. Yeah. We gotta put a plaque there. Well,
Right, 59 West.
Well, I read that they have the the distinguished blue plaque, which I read. I believe I read. I don't think I picked it up at another source, but in England they actually England is covered with these blue plaques that are very famous. They've been doing it for 150 years, and it marks where a very important thing in history has happened in England. It doesn't have to be necessarily English, but anything that happens in England of any real interest historically. And they have where he lived, where Jimmy lived in London. They have a blue plaque.
At
which
Handel's house?
is, I guess
Handel,
so.
yeah, okay.
and which is very high, like that's pretty high level. That's like you're saying right there, you're up there with the Magna Carta and all that kind
World
of
Heritage
stuff.
Site.
World Heritage Site, you know.
Well,
thing.
well, I like the British too, but I'm like Woody Allen. I say, why can't they call it good Britain? You know?
Well, didn't Jimmy go to find it easier to be discovered or be loved for his music in England than in the United States?
No doubt, because he was playing in the village. He was playing around, and people got to know him. It's funny because he used to play in these R&B groups, and he was living in Times Square, in SROs like Charlie Parker had till he moved to the Lower East Side, but living in SROs, and then finally he met Richie Havens at the Cheetah, some disco. And Richie Havens said, man, after talking to him and, seeing him, they said, man, you should go down to the village and go hang out in the village, man, because that's where you belong, and he did. And he discovered a home where he had like-minded people, and he hung out on McDougal Street, played at the Wah, and met John Hammonds and met Linda Keith. Everyone came through there, right? Len Chandler, of the Frogs, they were all down there. So he met them, and they loved him, and they recognized he was a unique, very talented, creative person. And he would play at the Waz, someone recently told me, for hours and hours, because he had, some juice and a amp and a space
An
to
access.
play,
Sure, he would practice there. I know my friend was a young man. He was the like the weekend janitor there, and he would come in the morning to clean up, and Jimmy would be there from early on playing, practicing, and he just had this incredible. He didn't know who he was, and he just had this incredible experience of listening to the music, and then seeing that this person later on in Woodstock is a huge star,